heroes. This is Monster Donut. Hey, my name is Nick Boraine. I play Kronos in Percy Jackson. Welcome.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Monster Donut, a literary and historical deep dive into the Percy Jackson series and all of its following spin-offs. I'm Phoebe, a dramaturg and story consultant.
And I'm Emily, a classic scholar-ish.
And today we have a very, very special guest. You may know her from the Black Sails podcast Fathoms Deep, or as the staff writer in the Percy Jackson and the Olympians writers' room. It is the wonderfully talented Daphne Olive. Hi, Daphne.
Hi.
I'm so excited to get to talk to you.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
We're so happy to have you and to finally get to talk about this incredible project that you have been working on. It is so stunning.
I'm so glad you're liking it. Thank you.
Before we dive all the way in, would you like to say something about yourself? Introduce yourself a little bit for those who may not know your voice or your background?
I am former jewelry designer turned Black Sails podcaster turned writer because John Steinberg and Dan Schatz invited me to become one.
Amazing. So for our audience's sake, I know that in roles like ours, the definition of our job varies from person to person and from project to project often. How would you define your role on Percy Jackson and the Olympians?
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess I'm going to go backwards a little bit and talk about a writer's room, because that is a whole culture that I had the privilege of entering and learning about, and I honestly love it. It's funny. I feel like a lot of people know about writers' rooms now, but it's also this kind of mysterious space that everyone knows it exists. Everyone knows names of people, but what actually happens there, feel like it was kind of a mystery to me. But what's really neat is it's collaborative storytelling and problem solving. A big part, I feel of writing television is, you want this, you want that, and you have to figure out how to make it all work, make sense, have good structure, have the emotions you want. And what's beautiful about a writer's room is that you have a lot of people who come from different places, come from different, have different skill sets when it comes to storytelling, have different perspectives, and you, as a group in the writer's room, you kind of take the story apart and put it back together again in adaptation. Now I've experienced in 2 shows that I work on. I work both on The Old Man and on Percy Jackson. And so one of them is coming up with a story from scratch, which is one type of process. And the other is adaptation, which is, it turns out, something I really love doing. But my particular role, as I understand it, is that I really, I love to think kind of big picture. And I love to think about all 5 books at one time and kind of always keep that kind of this shiny object in front of me, this larger story. I love to think in terms of finding pathways through themes to get to what, motivation and action should be. And one of my favorite things is just to insert myself into the heads of the characters as I understand them, and just trying to imagine, if I was them, what would I do? How would I react? What would be important to me? That, for me, is a really fun pathway to find the ways that I would contribute to the group discussion.
It's interesting you say that, too, because I feel like that's something I noticed coming back to, especially The Lightning Thief in the original series, as something I really noticed that Rick does in his writing is really show you how each character is exploring a lot of the themes in different ways. One that comes to mind is their relationships to their parents is a huge one, and the relation you see so many different shades of it, which is something that I found really, really exciting to dig into as a person as an analyzer? An analyst? As an analysist?
Oh, I like that word. That's a great version of it.
No, I definitely felt that really strongly in the show. Like, that's a theme that I've been thinking so much, like 24/7 since hearing it, about Echidna's family story line and that whole speech, honestly. It was such a brilliant take on that character, that she is a mother and that her actions toward her child are actually far less monstrous than what Athena is doing toward her child right now. And what does it mean for your understanding of what this family is that they're all a part of?
Yeah, I mean, it's really fun to have these kind of dual texts of Rick's book and the larger mythology to play with, because every bit of what she said is true to mythology. Like, they are actually one giant family. And which then is like, circles back into itself. That's just like Greek mythology. Until I read Rick's books, I never really thought about Greek mythology in this specific way, that it is the perfect way to look at family in all directions. Like, I think that, look from the child's view up, to look from the parent's view down, to look at it kind of more structurally, like what are things that repeat themselves and stuff like that. And it's just like, yes, I always knew that in Greek mythology they're a family, but like the kind of alchemy of trying to adapt this story and use more sources from Greek mythology to kind of like fill out these points of view that we don't have in the book was perfect. Like, they're just like, they were meant to be together, this way of investigating family from a structural and psychological level and Greek mythology. But the beautiful thing is, like, yes, of course, like, all of the characters speak in the books. It's not just, you're not only in Percy's brain, but you're still, because it's a first person POV, like you're very much everything you hear. Even I feel like my way of understanding the book is that everything you hear is being filtered through Percy's experience of it. Mm-hmm. So it's extremely subjective. And what we were kind of forced to do is pull back and create, television requires more of kind of an omniscient narrator in a way. You don't actually, I mean, some shows do have a narrator, we don't, but in a way you have to do that because you have to be in every person's head to be able to understand them enough to like write from multiple perspectives, to give an actor so that an actor has something to work with, like they need to understand their own motivation, their own, where they came from, what they're doing. Like, if you're only seeing the world through one person's eyes, you don't get that.
Yeah.
So it's like her speech, I feel like, is like a mix of all these cool elements. It's a great place to kind of talk about the process.
That was, I was thinking a lot about that when I was watching the way that Annabeth and Grover were interacting in episode 3 specifically. All of them in general, but specifically episode 3, their dynamic, just because we had never really seen it outside of Percy's perspective, and knowing that they'd known each other for so long and that like that was her protector. And then I started thinking about like, well, also Grover is Luke's protector, and that's a whole thing. Like, I was like, there are so many relationships that exist in this series that like I'm finally gonna get to explore because I don't have to live in this kid's head.
Right? I mean, it's so neat, right? Because it's like, I mean, we obviously, part of that story is like how learning this information affects Percy. But yeah, I mean, these people, they don't just, they have a deep relationship. Like, even if like they had never spoken in those years between when she came to camp and not, like, they have this experience in common that was so pivotal to each of their lives. And yeah, it's just so much fun to be able to think about that from outside of how it affects Percy, while also thinking about how it affects Percy.
Of course.
But yeah, I mean, it's just, it's such a great thing because on some level, like all of the characters, not all of the characters, all of the kids, all of the protagonists are heroes. We can discuss whether who is a hero and who isn't in this, but they're all having a version of a hero story. And so it's really neat to be able to imagine and fill out what, Annabeth's hero story is, what Grover's hero story is, like what, and that was a really fun thing with Grover, especially because, I think especially in the first book, like kind of, other than wanting food, like a big part of his character could be understood as cowardice, but also I feel like could be understood as like someone who had trauma, like had this awful weight. And so like there's just a lot of ways to then, when you're experiencing it as Grover's experience, like there are a lot of different ways you can take his behavior in the book and understand where it came from.
Well, on the topic of hero stories and what makes a hero versus maybe a monster, in the books, I think Percy comes into this series with probably the same attitude toward monsters as his audience, which is, you've been taught your whole life that monsters are monsters and heroes are heroes. And then we see that idea broken for him a couple times throughout the series, but here Percy has already kind of had that idea broken for him because he's starting the story a step ahead of us thanks to Sally, which is a shift that I'm really curious to see more from, because that means that you can take that arc kind of 100 different directions for him, and also means that every monster or hero or god he meets now comes with a different moral question, which is what makes someone a monster? Like, at what point is Percy now going to draw his sword on you?
Right.
So I'm just curious, what is going through your mind, specifically changing Percy's relationship to monstrousness from the beginning and teaching him the myths in that way? Honestly,
I feel like a big part of how we got there is not exactly from the, I'm going to start laughing at myself, because anyone like both of you now who've watched Black Sails knows that what is a monster? A monster versus a man is definitely a, but I feel like it's not just a Black Sails question. It is actually an interesting way to look at the question of good and bad, right? So there's like stories that, I won't name names, but there's stories about children where I feel like it's a lot more about like, this is what good, these are the good people and these are the bad people, and there's, you have to fight each other, which can be a very interesting story, but those stories don't touch me the same way as stories where there is the question of what is good and what is bad, which is not the same as like complete moral relativism, but it's something I think every single human struggles with every time, right? Like we struggle with in small ways, like you are feeling under the weather and you have plans with a friend and you're debating whether to cancel, right? Like just to bring it down to something super mundane, right? These are like, we have a lot of drives and a lot of things we do, but like ultimately we live in a place of like a constant questioning of ourselves, like are we doing right, are we not doing right, are we being monstrous, are we being heroic, are we like, and so part of it's that. I think from a process perspective, a lot of this sources back to Sally as a character, because because of this point of view thing, we had the opportunity, the challenge and opportunity of figuring out why she made the choices she made, right? Like, because in the books you just experience those as a child experiences, like, this is what my parent did, this is what my parent didn't do, this is what they said. And, children live in a state which sometimes dissipates when they become adults and sometimes doesn't ever, of like not understanding why their parents did what they did. But we as writers had to understand why Sally did what she did. And so that from that arose this idea that like, it's just, honestly, it's just like if you put yourself in Sally's shoes, like, right, like you're a seer, which again, that was something that became part of the story later in the books, but we can draw from all of the books, or all of the 5 books is how we've been approaching it. But that was like this great thing. It's like, oh, this is a great thing that we can pull from the story overall. But for Sally, obviously, it didn't become true only in I guess Percy started to realize it in book 3, right? But for Sally, it was true her whole life. So like that had to be an integral part of like why she made the choices she did. But even if you took out the seer part, there's just the challenge of like, you're a human parent, the demigod child. What are you going to do? Right? Yeah. So like, I'm sure some of them didn't, but we also like kind of came with this idea that like, no matter how you judge Poseidon, there's a sense that like he and Sally loved each other. And that he cared, at least about her, right? Like, even if you could argue that he didn't care about Percy, like, at least he cared about her. So, like, then also came in this idea that he probably filled her in a little bit on what all this means. And so then with those kind of hypothetical data points, there's, what would she do? She can't tell him what he is. She didn't want to send him to camp, or we have the reality in the books that she didn't send him to camp. So we had to, infer from that she didn't want to, right? Maybe she knew about him being a child of the big 3 and the added danger of that. And maybe she didn't, but maybe she did. But like, if that's part of it, then like it made so much sense for us to have her be instructing him. So, okay, now I'm going to speak as me, because honestly, it was a long time ago that we were like breaking all this stuff. Yeah. But it felt interesting to me, like in a world, whether she knew or not, but in a world where Percy was not just in danger from monsters, right? Like, so your average demigod, their biggest problem is monsters are chasing me, get to camp is safe. But that was not the reality for Percy, right? Like as a child of Poseidon, as we know, like it is obviously introduced in the first book, but continues to be an issue, is like, he's not really safe in the mythological world. Like, he's not safe once he gets to camp either. So it's just like, so you see what I'm saying? Like, that already kind of brings up this question of like, who's safe, who's not safe, who's good for him, who's not good for him, when the gods aren't a refuge from the monsters, where camp isn't a refuge. So like, okay, sorry, I do feel like I'm going like way around this question, but I just feel like it's all intertwined. Like that, there's this beautiful ambiguity in his thing where it's just like, it's not just I'm in danger from the bad guys, monsters. And I go to the good guys, gods and demigods, and then I'm safe. Like, it's much more complex for him than that. And so, like, this just felt like, it feels like it's almost like it's so in the text, even though that actual juxtaposition isn't worded in the text in that way, but it's so, in my understanding of the story, it's so essential to this whole story. Right? I mean, and then, then we take the relationship of Percy and Luke. Like, it's just, who's the hero and who's the monster? It's not that one of them is or they're interchangeable. It's that they both are both in some ways.
It's interesting you bring that up also, because I was thinking about, coming from the historical perspective, all this stuff. I have a theory that the reason why the Iliad exists as such like a foundational text, and why so many people use it as a touchstone, and like it has lasted so long, because it had competition. There were plenty of other epics we've now lost about the Trojan War surrounding it. And even there was a brief period of time, actually, around like, I think the Enlightenment period, where there were a couple people that published like, this is what really happened at the Trojan War, which turned out to be a forgery. That was actually, a lot of people were like, oh no, this is the on the ground real Iliad account. Let's get rid of that other stuff. Which is one of my favorite fun facts.
That's amazing. I did not know that. That's amazing.
But there's something about the power of the storytelling in the Iliad that I think has made it last so long. And I think for me, what I've always thought the reason was because there are no good guys and bad guys. Like, it is such a it's a story that is so fundamentally about individual struggles with so many different things that all kind of come out in this one grand narrative of a war that I think I even mentioned this in an episode that I sort of interpret almost as like a war between mortality and immortality, like the mortals and the gods. So to me, it makes total sense that you find this all so linked together as well in that way, because I feel like that's how I sort of think about a lot of this stuff too.
I mean, it's interesting the way you just put that, because I think now I'm just getting into like my theories about story and humans is I think that some part of us craves, right? The cleanliness of good guys and bad guys. Mm-hmm. But I also believe that like that kind of touches the surface of like what we want. It's like the cotton candy, right? Like, it's like, oh, that tastes good right now, but it's gone. But what the stories that endure are the ones that go deeper into the things that we essentially need. Like, and I mean, yeah, I'm now really getting into how I see story, but it's just like, there are things that are like, ooh, that's fun. And that feels really satisfying in the moment. And then there are things that kind of touch your soul. And I am a person who believes like that there are certain things, certain like flavors. I'm trying to think of I feel like if this is so deep in my belief system, I should have a better analogy, but like there's certain things that touch us really deeply and that do have a little bit of a universality to them because they're like maybe beyond culture to like just emotional states of being that are essential, like hunger, like this, so that they really are deep down, like primordial things urges that we have and things that we need. And I think that it's the complex story, like kind of like I said earlier, like the complex stories are the ones that really satisfy us and endure because they speak to what we are actually humans grapple with every single day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's nothing satisfying or common in an experience of like people being purely evil or purely good. I don't know any. I mean, maybe I just haven't met the right people. But.
That sort of puts to words, I think, some of the feelings I had, especially watching. What immediately comes to mind is the Medusa encounter in the show, just because I think that was the first real moment of, taking this, which is, I think in the book, she is painted more sympathetically than other of the monsters they encounter.
I agree.
But at the end of the day, she's still, a monster in the book. And she's still, they have to defeat her. And she still behaves exactly the way you'd expect a monster to. And so I found that such an interesting thing that got kicked off with the changes that were made to the Medusa encounter. Especially also, well, I don't know if Phoebe wants to. She noticed something also that I thought was really interesting.
I was particularly fascinated by the fact that we never saw Medusa's body because it was invisible, and so we didn't know whether she turned to dust or not. Because there are messy lines here between like monstrousness on like a metaphorical level and all of that, but there is a point at which a member of this family becomes a capital M monster by technicality, and it's like if you die you turn to dust, you go to Tartarus. Plus in the show you now have they can sense your weaknesses. Monsters sense your weaknesses and go after them,
but not your fear, because that's bees.
Right, that's not
that line was so funny.
Somebody should tell Echidna that.
But that includes people like in the book, at least, Procrustes, because he's just another son of Poseidon. He shouldn't crumbles to dust, but he does in the book. And so I'm not going to ask you what you think happens to Medusa's body, but I am going to ask you, how does that physical line where your body turns to dust and you're sent to Tartarus exist within this conversation around what makes a monster and that theme in this show, in your interpretation?
That's interesting. I'm going to put off that question until season 2, which is, hopefully we get one of those. But yes, I think that we will, well, I know that, the second book has this beautiful framing device of a Cyclops who is a sibling and a Cyclops who's also a sibling, but a monster. Mm-hmm. But the first one's also defined as a monster. So like this, I think is, I feel like it's almost like I can't really talk about it yet in the context of season 1, because it's going to be something that I feel like not only the show, but I will have better answers for after. It's interesting because it's like I've thought about it a lot, but one of the beautiful things about this process, this collaborative storytelling, is like in the process of everyone talking about things and in the process of figuring out how to depict them. Mm-hmm. It's like even places where I thought I really had to I was like, this is how I see this, but it's just an evolving thing, because we read books and we fill in blanks all the time, right? Like we don't even notice we're doing it. Like we visualize. Some people I've understood visualize more pictorially, some visualize more not pictorially, more experientially, but we're filling in blanks constantly. When you turn a book into a TV show or a movie, you have to fill in all those blanks. Like the writer's room, the writers, directors, everyone involved in the production, basically their job is to fill in those blanks because you have to actually show it. And so that process ends up being this really this circular thing where it's like you bring in your ideas and your opinions and you deal with the challenges on the ground and in the writing, and you interact with other people who have their opinions and assumptions, and then you come out often with something much better than what any one person could have ever thought of. So that was a really elaborate way for me to avoid a question, but
it's fine. We'll come back to it.
We'll stick a pin in that way.
Yep. I do find it interesting that you bring that up, though, because something I have noticed about this show that I think actually the Medusa having the invisibility cap on is an example of is that I've noticed the show has still found ways to maintain some of the ambiguity, especially in the more mythological aspects, which is something I find really interesting. Just because that's such a huge piece of the mythology is the fact that there is no one story, there's no one version of it, there's no correct thing. You kind of just pick your faves and go with it.
Pick your faves and go with it. My go-to move.
And I definitely want to dig into that a lot more, I think, later in the conversation. Because it makes me very interested to know why we choose. Because I think it's so personal to everybody, which aspects of which myths they connect with, they want to bring into a story. But one thing I found really interesting was the fact that we're presented with prophecy and fate sort of being two separate ideas. And also, if I recall correctly, the way they are explained is almost opposite to each other. Because I believe Annabeth explains prophecies are things you don't try to figure out. They don't necessarily mean what you like. The more you try to find meaning in them, the worse it's going to be for you. Versus fate, when she talks about fate, and Percy's like, oh, so that must be ambiguous, like prophecy stuff, essentially. So that's at least how I interpreted the scene. She's like, nope, it means someone's going to die.
I'm going to address this primarily as a Daphne answer, not a show answer necessarily, but in that I'm going to say I'm not sure those are different. I disagree with you that those are different, because what is fate, right? Like if we take the great prophecy, which is fate, it's all fate. Like ultimately, isn't a prophecy just an expression of fate? It's just an oracle is a mouthpiece of fate, right? So both a prophecy and fate, they are unknowable. Like in that, we don't know how we're going to get there. There is something that's going to happen. Every single bit of this prophecy and of the great prophecy come true. They just don't necessarily come true in the way you think they're going to come true. And it's the same with fate. Like, let's take the story of Perseus. His grandfather was told that his grandson would kill him, right? He didn't know when. He didn't know how. He didn't know, so if he talked to Annabeth and said, how can I prevent this? Annabeth would say, well, I don't know. You're just at step one. You need to go down this path before we'll understand what it really means. Yeah, sure, death. But that's like saying, that's like saying a lot of things, like saying a friend will betray Percy. Like the question mark is which friend, how will the betrayal, all these things. But the fact that a friend will betray, that's fate. And I think that what's so fun about fate and prophecy is, again, I'm just going to go back to humans. It's just like, I had a conversation with a friend of mine not so long ago where she was like, I hate fate as a concept. Because I think a lot of people talk about fate in these like extremes, right? It's like either I have choices or things are chosen for me. And there's nothing in between. But that's not true, right? Like there are things we are all fated. We are all fated to die, let's say, not to get morbid, but it's true, right? That is every single human being's fate. We all know we're going to die. We don't know when we're going to die. We don't know what it's going to look like. But that doesn't mean we don't have choice. Like, yes, we do not have the choice not to die. I know some people would like to pretend we do, but we don't have the choice not to die. But we have a million choices, more than a million. We have so many choices between this moment when the three of us are talking to each other and when we'll die. And we have so many choices, what we're going to do with this time, how we're going to be, who we're going to be, who we're going to help, who we're going to hurt, where we're going to live, all of these choices, right? And so you don't know how those choices are going to relate to this future that is waiting for you of death. So we can't know how we get to this thing, and we can't even know exactly the nature of the thing that's waiting for us, but it's waiting for us, no matter what. And I think it's a really interesting thing when you start looking at how each character in the books, and, I'm hoping to extrapolate that into the show. It's like each character has a very different relationship to the idea of fate, the idea that they can't change things, right? Like this idea that just the agreement between the big three, right? Isn't that just them trying to avoid fate? Mm-hmm. The great prophecy predates this story. Therefore, by not like trying to not have children, they were trying to avoid a fate, which, even like the funny thing about that is like, it's not even says whether this hero in the great prophecy is good or bad, right? So it's like there's like we're just going to take no chances and like not have children, even if the children are the ones who are going to save us, right? Because they're just trying to avoid fate. So I feel like that's a really fun lens for the overall story, is like how people relate to fate. And I think that also has to do with how they relate to the hierarchy in the story, whether or not in general, they like the idea that somebody else gets to make decisions for them and have power over them.
Something I was just thinking about as you were talking too is the fact that I don't think the happy stories have prophecies in Greek mythology. I was just thinking about it, and like all of the tragedies are the ones with prophecies. The prophecy almost creates the tragedy, which I think is interesting also in light of Percy Jackson, considering, these books aren't tragedies. Well, I guess it depends who you are.
It depends. Exactly.
Yeah, they're kind of a tragedy for me, a Luke fan.
Exactly. Right. Well, and I think that gets down to it. It's like, right, whether something is a tragedy or not is a matter of perspective. Whether or not, you're right. It's true. Like the ones that we experience as not tragedies, it makes less sense to have a prophecy, to be perfectly honest, because then it's not a story of like grappling with something you can't control and losing.
Yeah.
But I'm also a person who like doesn't really divide the world into tragedy and not tragedy. I think that life is a mix of both. So ultimately, they're all a little bit of everything. I just think the prophecy is such or any prophecy or any idea of fate is such a neat way to look at the struggle it is that is essential to what it is to be human. Not to like keep saying that is the ultimate answer to every question, but it is kind of, right?
When it comes to things like fate, I also think of things like fatal flaw as sort of part of the topic because they are inevitable in some way.
Absolutely.
I'm curious how much are fatal flaws playing in your mind as part of the conversation in the writer's room? And then part of that was because my second question is that we know Percy and Annabeth's book canon Fatal Flaw, and I'm wondering if you thought about Grover's.
Oh, yeah, I have. I don't know if it's really been a topic. I mean, to answer your question, yes, fatal flaws are absolutely discussed in the writer's room, because fatal flaws, I mean, deep down, what is a fatal flaw if not personality, right? I mean, it's just like, which is absolutely the job of writers to contemplate the personality of their characters. So yes, fatal flaws are important. Fatal flaws are important, in the books. Like they are a crucial part of how the story plays out. So they are important, therefore, to the adaptation of the books. It's interesting. Okay. Oh God, I'm gonna get theoretical on you again. Sorry, I'm just like, it's like the philosophy of fatal flaws.
You're saying this like we don't want you to.
I mean, the way I see fatal flaws, which again, like I promise I'm not just trying to be a generalist. It's just like, I see all story and characters as, representations of the struggles humans go through. So all fatal flaws are a person's strength and their weakness, right? Like, fatal flaw is an interesting way to think about them, right? Which I think the way you said it is a perfect way to look at it. It's something that is fated to them. It is something that they have to, like fate, and like I said earlier about death and things like that, like, it's something you can't change. You can only, like, incorporate that into the way that you navigate the world. How's that for a way of saying it? That makes sense to me. Yeah. I've never actually expressed it that way before, but that feels right to me. But the interesting thing about a fatal flaw is, like, in Percy Jackson, my sense of the fatal flaws is that they are always the person's strength and their weakness. It is the thing that gets them in trouble. It is also the source of their strength. And that's what makes it so interesting, because the process of growing up and learning and changing for each of them is to learn how to grapple with their fatal flaw. So, like, one of my favorite examples is, like, I feel like, in book 5, like, everything Hestia says to Percy is like she's describing him to himself. And she's just saying, like, don't fight who you are. I mean, she never says that, I know. So, but that's my interpretation of what she's saying, is she's giving these examples of stepping aside and not being the hero, in capitals, in all caps even. She's telling him a version of what is his fatal flaw, and has been, I feel like, only defined to him as a negative up until that point. And that essentially he's going to choose, I mean, this is, my interpretation of his fatal flaw, but he's going to choose love over glory. So that's why I love the concept as presented in these books of fatal flaws, because every single one of them had like all human choice, like the differences between being a hero and a tragic hero, is that it's all about the choices you make, not about your fate necessarily, not about what traits you have that you can't change. It's what you do with it. And not to start sounding like a superhero movie, but so Grover's.
Yes.
I mean, I know this sounds really obvious, but I think it's his empathy. And everyone should watch The Old Man, not just because I helped write it, but because I think it's a great show. But there is a moment where one of the characters talks about empathy as a weapon. And empathy is something that you can fall into, right? You can lose years of your life to guilt because of empathy. Not just talking about Grover, talking about anyone, but but Grover in particular, right? But also you could sit across from a god even and use your ability of empathy to find out information that neither of you necessarily realized you were even getting until you get it. And so that's why I would say his fatal flaw is empathy. What do both of you think his fatal flaw is?
Well, I hadn't actually thought of it as both your greatest strength and your greatest weakness. I've been thinking of it strictly as weakness. That is a good point. And as soon as you said that, I was like, oh, obviously, empathy. It's right there. But I actually hadn't given it that much thought, really. And when I realized that it's because you all have brought so much out of Grover in this show that I am thinking about him more than I ever have.
Awesome. Best compliment ever.
And so watching that scene with Ares, like I was just so taken by how powerful he is.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. But that's all in the book too, right? Like there's just like everything, the powers he starts to express and receive later on, they're all based in empathy as well.
Mm-hmm.
So like this concept, again, it's just, I feel like what we were doing was we were bringing later Grover forward a little bit because, again, we're experiencing it from Grover's perspective. And, and all of the things that he does are about, empathy turned into something more supernatural because it can go both ways, right? Like the empathy bond, what is it called? The thing that he does in the end of the
panic.
Yeah, exactly. So like, and even the way he uses the pipes, like all of those things are about, if you took the idea of like the way we have empathy and turn it into something more magical where it can go in both directions. So yeah, I just feel like what we did was like, this is kind of for a mythological creature, I'm going to say it's naturalistic, but like for a mythological creature with, more powers than we have in terms of what you would define as empathy, this is the version that he is expressing before he becomes more powerful and then later empowered by Pan to be even more powerful.
That's I've never thought about it that way before, so I'm just turning this over in my head like, ooh. Because whenever in the past I've tried to find someone's fatal flaw, I look to the times they've almost died and why.
Oh.
Or at least almost died because they did something that they maybe shouldn't have.
Yeah, but don't you feel like, this is, again, now I'm going to get theoretical about story, but like when you think about a tragic hero, like Phoebe has heard me talk about this a lot in the context of Black Sails, a tragic hero is a hero. Like a hero who tried so hard, like they did everything they could do to do something heroic, but they failed in some way. That was their downfall. And so like, isn't that the same idea? Like that is essentially what you just said, like almost dying or falling, in a more emotional or, good and evil way from trying to do something. But the only time when we say they shouldn't have is because they failed. Had they succeeded, then we would no longer say they shouldn't have done it. Then we would say, wow, they're amazing. Look at them. They did a great thing. And so that's the only difference in my eyes, that's the only difference between those two things, is if they're trying to do good, which is, different than trying to do evil. But if you're trying to do good and fail, like you end just short of the mark, then it feels like a fatal flaw in the negative way. But if they tried the exact same thing and succeeded, then it's same traits, same behavior, same choices, but like slightly different, either in circumstance or the nature of the choice, that would make you think of it as something that's not failure.
Yeah, that makes me think of this. I can't remember if it's a famous quote or not, but I remember reading it somewhere that, like, at least I think it was in the context of Shakespeare, like all of the tragedies are just, they wouldn't have been tragedies if you just swapped the main character from a different main character. I forget exactly the wording and who said it, but
I remember this as a Tumblr post, so
I think I saw it on Tumblr.
Hey, then it's a good Tumblr post. But yeah, it's just that, it all goes back again to this idea that like it's the not, strict dichotomy. It's the actual complexity that speaks to human experience. Wow, I am just a broken record on that front in this podcast episode. But it's what makes it fun, right? It makes it fun when you're like you see people striving to be good and not managing, or striving to be good and managing, but like knowing that they could have failed. If you felt the whole time like they were going to succeed no matter what, like what's the fun in that?
Yeah. is interesting because I was thinking about this while watching Black Sails.
Of course.
Because it felt so human to me in that way, and I was trying to figure out why, and I realized it's just because nothing's going right the way you want it to go. And I think it's just that infuriating thing of like, you've got this huge grand plan, but you don't have control over any of the moving pieces, no matter how hard you try, and you have to deal with that.
You could be speaking about fate right now.
Could be.
I think the next thing we really wanted to talk about was episode 5.
Cool.
The encounter with Hephaestus in particular. You know, as someone who's also engaged a lot with mythology and like used myths also in some of my own writing, like basically it always interests me to see what other people take out of mythology in this way. And I see it most reflected often when they're using it to tell their own stories, because it's just by nature, that's how it has always been, sort of people just taking their own interpretations. So I would love to talk about the decision to change which story we are telling from the book to the show with Hephaestus. So the original story in the book is the story, the myth that it's sort of based on, that the encounter is based on, is the story of Hephaestus trapping Ares and Aphrodite together to kind of humiliate them, basically. And in the show, it's a different Hephaestus story, which also features trapping, about when he trapped Hera in a chair. But it wasn't to humiliate a god. It wasn't to humiliate Ares and Aphrodite. It was to essentially, the way I kind of interpret it is establish his like importance to the gods, like to show them like he is powerful.
Oh, that's interesting.
That's sort of, I mean, that is sort of how I interpret the myth.
No, I love that interpretation. That's interesting.
I suppose a question that I don't know if you can answer is what was the first impetus of like, I wonder if we should change this?
Whew, that is a big question too. I'm going to take it from a few different angles. One is just the practical considerations of the actual way it is in the book with the ride and the spiders and all of that it's just going to be very, very hard to produce. So there's that. It would just be a lot of, if I understand the challenges exactly, is like a lot of virtual effects things that would be basically over, just like all over, like all those little spiders were just going to be a lot of work, a lot of money to produce. So then that kind of opened things up. But then the larger question, and this gets to why, when Phoebe asked me which episode I would like to be interviewed after, it is this episode because it's my favorite.
I think it's my favorite too.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes me happy. So it's all, I feel like in the context of the episode, it's almost impossible to talk about Hephaestus without talking about Ares too. Mm-hmm. So if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna I'm gonna answer your question hopefully, but like in a little bit of a roundabout way. If you're gonna tell a family story, right? If you're going to investigate all of these different relationships, one of those relationships is siblings, right? So this is actually, to be perfectly honest, like if we're being super honest about it, it is a Hephaestus, Ares, Athena story in episode 5. And what do those three have in common? They are children of Zeus. I mean, I know there's other children of Zeus, but they are children of Zeus. And when you think, like, when you take out the God part of who they are, like, and you just think of them as siblings, right? They are siblings who were born in a certain order. They are siblings who have received different levels of affirmation and non-affirmation from their parents, and that creates sibling dynamics. And so this is part of it. Like the show and your podcast have investigated the Athena and Annabeth dynamic, and this idea of like trying to be enough, be good in the eyes of one's parent. But Athena also has a parent, and she shares that parent with Hephaestus and with Ares. And so then you start, like, that's part of why I love this episode so much, is like in the context of Annabeth and Percy kind of making text the stuff that we talked about earlier about Sally and about the nature of family, and this family in particular, to see how the effects of the family dynamic have influenced the siblings, the children, who are themselves gods as well. Like, they're also children of parents. So yes, like Hephaestus and Ares, rivals for Aphrodite's love and all of this, but like ultimately they're brothers who had very different experiences in the world of that family. Oh, right. This was another thing that I loved thinking about was the gods. I mean, I don't really know the history, but my assumption is for historical purposes of like when they showed up and, you know, cultures combining. And so you end up in a situation where at some point along the way, we started to talk about like the gods have overlap, like they all have overlapping domains. So it's like they're, you know, like, yes, Hephaestus is a craftsperson, but like Athena's also a craftsperson, and Ares is war, but Athena's also war. And so it's like, that is really interesting too, when you think about them just as children, right? It's just like if you have a family with multiple children, and it's like really easy for everyone if each child kind of has their skill set and the things that they're good at and the things their parents praise them for. But often when two kids are kind of like living within the same realm in their development, like then it becomes competition. Not always, but it can. But especially with a family like this that's so hierarchical.
It's so funny because I literally made I have two younger brothers, and I made a triple Venn diagram once of the three of us because I thought that would be funny.
Exactly. It's just so interesting to me. Like, Ares is like, yay, I love my family. But at the same time, he's like, why does everyone think my sister's better than me? So this actually aligns very well with what you said about Hephaestus. That just doesn't happen to be the side of it. That's why I liked it so much. Like, it totally aligns with this, right? It's just like, if all of the children, like Annabeth is doing with her mother, if all of the children gods are basically needing to do the same thing, is prove their worth, and are in competition to do so, which, I mean, is kind of like if Zeus sent out all of his children to look for the bolt, he's basically, you're like, who's going to be the good kid who finds it for me? Right? I mean, you know, I don't know what kind of parent he is that it didn't occur to him that any of his kids were involved, but whatever. But so the story of the throne is Hephaestus saying, these are my powers, this is my worth. I see it also as, this is like a very heartbreaking way to see it. It's just like a child literally grabbing their parent and not letting them go until they recognize them. Like, the throne is a device of a thing that a lot of children have an urge to do, which is just assert themselves to a parent that doesn't recognize them until the parent recognizes them. So that's not why the change. I mean, that's why is such an interesting question when, so like, those are a lot, that's like a giant bag of inspirations. Yeah. Right? So like, I just said a lot of like thematic, mythological, psychological gobbledygook, right? So that's the kind of stuff one brings into a writer's room. Is you bring your bag of goodies into a writer's room, and everyone else brings their bag of goodies into a writer's room. But the job at hand is to figure out how to construct a story. So, you know, so each person, some of their goodies end up in the story, and if they like fit together like puzzle pieces and fit the structure and fit with what you're trying to like do in that episode, do in the season, do emotionally for the characters, for the place you want them to develop, then that's what ends up in the episode. So it's a mixture between the fact that the spider version was you know, kind of unproducible in the parameters that we had, and also that the throne ended up offering all of these new ways to tell the story, but again, still feeling like it's in the spirit of the old story, because like ultimately Hephaestus's story is very sad and tragic. Like he he can't catch a break, right?
Yeah.
He's had a rough time of it. And it's interesting because that makes him, in a lot of ways, of the gods. I mean, I know Dionysus is literally the most like a demigod of the gods, but of the gods, kind of situationally, he's the one who's kind of closest in this very, very strong hierarchy. He's the one who's in a lot of ways closest to them because the gods don't treat him like they do the other gods.
You feel that so strongly with bringing him in, like actually physically bringing him into the room, especially in the same episode as Ares, because you can feel just, I mean, we clearly felt it because we spent a lot of that episode just trying to piece together what was up with this guy. You can feel how much he just doesn't quite fit into like what you've learned of this family so far. And then when he comes out, it's just so clear. Like Emily said, that he was just a kid that was tossed out of his family who lost his childhood and is trying to find his place in it, but doesn't have one really.
Right. I mean, I guess the question I'm going to pose to like think about for the future is like, do all of the gods, I mean, he's the most extreme version, the most obvious version, the most quantifiable version, but like, do any of the gods really fit? Mm-hmm. Like, are they getting what they want? Are they satisfied, let's say?
Yeah. That's a question.
I'll say before the episode with Lin-Manuel Miranda, I did not intend that to be a Hamilton reference. But yeah, it's, this is how families work, right? Like there's every parent was a child. I mean, okay, I guess in the mythological world, not every parent was a child because some of them were created in different ways. But if we are looking at the Olympians as the human avatars that I think they are, I don't just mean in the books, I mean in general, as archetypes. I think that every, like I just said, every parent is a child. Every person who is at the top of a hierarchy was probably lower down in a hierarchy at some point. And so it's not just, I guess what I'm trying to say, it's not just the monsters that we want to investigate what their interiority is. Mm-hmm. It is also the gods because they're all part of the family. And I would just like to credit the amazing, wonderful, beautiful, and very weird brains of John Steinberg and Zoe Neary, because the two of them together are what happened in the tunnel with the music and the visuals. And I mean, I am so blessed to honestly work with everyone who has been involved with this. From Rick and Becky, through the writer's room, through the production people, through being on set, which I got to do a lot, which was so much fun, and meet people and talk to them about what they do, because I'm still so new to all this and learning. But the fact that I get to be the person who enjoys the process of watching John's brain and Zoe's brain is so good. But yes, this was the pinnacle for me. Like, this moment is just where the two of them brought their creativity and weirdness together in the best way. And it's so wonderful. And I wish, one of the saddest things for me was that I was not on set when they were filming that. I got to see pictures of it, but I was not on set for that. So I wish I had been, because I loved watching the process of the development of that. Zoe, I mean, she posted them as stories. She posted her original sketches that probably by the time this comes out, they won't be in her Instagram story anymore. But her sketches that became the kind of inspiration for the projection on the wall is so funny and wonderful.
The idea of Hephaestus designing that entire projection is hilarious, actually.
I mean, right, but it's like, isn't that awesome? Like, you have Ares on the one side. Like, again, I think the telling side of what he's saying is how competitive he is with his sister. So my interpretation of Ares is that he's protesting a little bit too much in the direction of like, I fit. Mm-hmm. But then to have his brother who's just like, I will build a monument to how much I don't fit and my life was really kind of a mess. Mm-hmm. That's a certain kind of person who would do that.
And have some fun with it.
And have some fun with it. Oh God, yeah, it's yeah. I feel like I mean, this is actually a beautiful. I feel like this is a beautiful example of both how collective storytelling brings out things that any one of us would never have been able to come up with, right? Like it's just like it's such a blend of so many minds that managed to make this like very weird and wonderful thing. And I feel like I'm now starting to understand something that I heard in my interviews, in my podcast, that now I'm starting to understand, is that sometimes you're part of creating something and you don't even necessarily fully understand what parts of you ended up in the contributions to the thing as it ended. And then you have this thing that you can look at later on as a creator. Like, I mean, you know, I guess your audience doesn't necessarily know, like I fully love like the process of and listening to other people interpret stories of all sorts, stories that have nothing to do with me. But even as someone who is part of making the story, you can learn stuff about what the final product, even the stuff that was your contributions to it, well afterwards, just by looking at it again, going, wow, that has angles that I hadn't even thought of myself. And so you start to kind of learn about yourself a little bit in the process as well. So it's art is wild, isn't it? It's just
so true.
You can't pin it down even when you were one of the people making it. And that's the beauty, because you can just continue to learn from it.
Yeah. It becomes a million different things after a million different people watch it.
Right. I mean, that's so cool. Like, if I had all the time in the world, I would love to listen to what everyone thinks, because I'm sure people are seeing stuff that we didn't even think of, and that's amazing. It's so cool.
I'm now wondering if you had a particular memory from being on set or seeing the finished product where it, like, something came to life for you in a way that just made you so, like, I don't know, you know those light bulb moments? I feel like when you create something and you see it come to life in front of you in a way that you never expected.
Goodness. I mean, honestly, I this is not me avoiding that question. It's hard for me to pinpoint one, because I feel like, partly because I'm so new to this is so magical for me. I feel like I had so many of them. I mean, honestly, being on set and watching scenes happen in front of my eyes that I had anything to do with conceiving of is already pretty magical. It's all still very abstract to me, and getting less so. Like, this show really kind of, because, honestly, the fandom is so amazing, and so, like, it's so wonderful to see everyone's reactions, but I'm still in a place where, like, I get on set and then I realize, like, this wasn't just an exercise of me and my friends sitting around and talking story with each other. So, like, that's not really, I think, what you were looking for, but, like, I'm so new to this that I got first time I came on set, I mean, any set is so many people. I mean, it's just like, it's like a whole village of talented people being talented with each other. It's so amazing. And so, but I experienced that the first time on The Old Man, because that was the first show I worked on. But to come to this show, because the scale was so massive, and to get to know everyone, and just that, I mean, it's just honestly, like, one of my favorite experiences was a day where they were filming on location and I didn't go, and I don't remember why. Maybe because I had writer's room for either Percy or The Old Man. I don't remember, but I think I had to be, like, at the offices that were by the volume stage, like where kind of the home base was. And so I was just wandering around, because I loved wandering around. I loved looking at all the sets that were in progress and just everything. Just I really, really love my job. But it was a day where, like, there wasn't that kind of activity, and there wasn't like all the people I usually work with and stuff, and I was just wandering around. And I went into the volume stage, and they were building the main house. Like the carpenters were building the main house, and I was like, I'm still like getting better about this, but like I'm usually very nervous on set. Oh, not nervous, but I just like don't want to get in people's way. Like I'm really, really conscious to, and so I was like kind of like doing this thing where it's like kind of standing on the side and like peeking from far away to see what they were doing. And the carpenters invited me up onto the stage to see what they were doing, and it was so much fun to talk to them, like, because they were asking me about the scenes that were going to be there, and I was asking them about the building process, and it's that. It's just like we sat around, well, it was during the pandemic, so mostly on Zoom. We sat around and talked about the story, and everyone worked hard to write the episodes and, you know, and rewrite the episodes and all this stuff. But then ultimately, it's just kind of magical to see it all become. But maybe I'll come up for another time that I'm talking to. I'll come up with a specific, but also having, I mean, a very specific one is having Jessica Parker Kennedy, one of my favorite actors in the world, play Medusa, one of my favorite characters in the world, which my love for Medusa predates me even being aware of the fact that I could be a writer, let alone working on this show. So to have that combination was a huge moment for me also.
She was brilliant casting.
She always is. But yes, she was particularly brilliant in this case. I think it was a wonderful choice, not just because she's talented, but because of her physicality. Just like she just is, I feel like in so many ways, like before she ever said a word, it was already expressing that like this interpretation of Medusa is very different than many, not in relation to the book necessarily, but just in relation to the world of presentations of Medusa, which was awesome. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then in addition to that, she's just such a good actor.
So final question. Since you are here to discuss specifically 105, that's what you requested. Mm-hmm. What bead would you design?
Oh my God, I cannot believe I didn't prepare. I knew you were going to ask me this. I did not prepare for this. Okay.
What bead would you design that you would offer at the end of the summer if this episode were the summer?
If this episode were the summer. I mean, part of me wants it to be the throne because, you know, that is not only a good central piece of this episode, but also like, you know, something that is specific to what we did in our adaptation. So that feels like I should pick it. But what I want to pick is one of the shadow drawings from the production.
Yeah.
I think, but I don't know which one. Like, maybe I'm gonna choose this. I'm gonna choose the one of Hera when you see Hephaestus inside of her. Mm-hmm. Because I'm totally choosing that because I feel like that is not only for this episode, but for the whole show, because we have spent so much time talking about parents and children.
Yeah.
That's my choice.
That's a perfect one. That's the one I should have chosen.
But I'm the guest, so I get to go first.
Oh, man. Maybe following this conversation. Wait, the Fates are in that episode.
Yes, they are.
I'm obviously.
There you go.
I'm doing their ball of thread, their ball of yarn, their electric blue ball of yarn.
Didn't you pick that for our first ever our lightning tape episode?
But I did the socks for that one, so I'm just it's slightly different.
Oh, you could do the yarn with the needles.
Yes,
you could do the yarn with the two needles. That would make a nice composition.
Mm-hmm. It would. Maybe I'll do the triple Venn diagram.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Awesome.
The one I made for my brothers and I.
Oh, okay. Yeah, just send me that one and all.
Absolutely. So it's two brothers and you. So you're the Athena in this story?
Mm. Yeah, I'm the eldest daughter.
There you go. You are the Athena in this story. I love it.
It's all coming together.
Yeah, I know. It's all like, that's it. It's a perfect podcast episode. Like we brought it full circle to Emily's family and her being the Athena and her family.
Uh-huh.
There you go.
Thank you all for listening to Monster Donut, and thank you, Daphne, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great fun.
Until the next time.
Yeah. Please go ahead and plug all of the many things that you do.
Okay. Well, there's Percy Jackson and the Olympians. In addition to that, for your listeners who are not small children, I would say also if you're enjoying this, you should watch my favorite show in the world, Black Sails, and also the other show that I work on with John Steinberg and Dan Schatz, which is The Old Man.
Yeah. And while you watch Black Sails, go listen to Fathoms Deep.
Oh, right. That too. Right. Yes, I have a podcast called Fathoms Deep, and you should listen to it. I forget about that part.
How could you forget?
I know. If you liked the weird way I talked here, there's hours of that waiting for you in my own podcast.
And now, post Daphne conversation, Phoebe here to give a big shout out to Nick Boraine for the intro of this episode. It's terrifying and wonderful. Thank you. We love you. And now that we've wrapped up here, I want to say thank you to our patrons, RK, Window Wells, Emily Ann Bonney, Roman Consul, Latino Kaya, Patty VCK, Bethany from Public Works, Sydney Fox, Joke, Reina Avila Ramirez Arellano, Charlie McNeil, Bronte Libo, Chief and Plays, Robert Gamer, Kels, Kari, and Layla. If you'd like to join us over on Patreon, you can find the link to do that in the description of this episode or in our link tree on all of our social media at PJOPod on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. You can also find the link to our merch shop there or at monsterdonut.redbubble.com. And please continue to send in all of your thoughts and questions and analysis about this season so far. We are nearing the end, which means that we'll be doing a wrap-up soon. So send your thoughts in either at any of those social medias or to monsterdonutpodcast@gmail.com. That's all for now. We'll see you later. Bye.